just a bit quick about originally aerospace engineer, although it was like really too technical for me, so I went straight into strategy and operations. So I pretty much built a career around innovation, and specifically on how to design innovation teams. So I started as a consultant at Capgemini, did a lot of projects in telco, until I decided to get into startups myself. I tried a bit of a tech startup for sports for, let's say, 5 years. And it's a typical story where you know the theory, you consult it, you coach it, but then when you do it yourself, you hit every single possible wall you can hit. So I did that for a while. And then I met Maya, and we were helping during the refugee crisis here in Holland. We started up an incubator to teach refugees about entrepreneurship. And that kind of evolved. And now we're brand marketing agency in Tortuga, where she does mostly the brand and communication strategy. And I step in more to shape the teams, right? To get the systems in place so they can grow faster.
Cool. I'm really curious to hear from everyone what brought them here today. If you are building your team, if you're struggling with your team, if you're just curious about the topic, if there's anything that you want Ángel in particular to address. Who has a team? First of all, hands up. Okay. Cool. How big is the team?
3 people, 5, varies. Yeah.
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. I mean, usually for me, what I've seen, I've also coached us at Aim for the Moon, and to set up like innovation teams within them. The elements are always the same, whether it's 5 teams or 200. It's just a matter of adapting it to the size and usually layering it. So let's say as I go through it, because I made it really practical today to just basically walk you through a case of what I typically do when I step into a team, from analyzing to trying to improve the culture. So then we can always, at any point throughout the thing, you guys can stop me, and if you have a thought on your concrete case, we can always address it as I touch the different topics. Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to interrupt you so often, you're going to wish you never said that.
Yeah.
No problem.
I'm
just
the worst.
a fair warning, like people, like usually when you do team culture, it's a very left brain, right? People and all that. I have a very right brain approach. So I like to always say that it's kind of, I try and give it a structure so then the left brain people can execute quicker. And it's just a way, it helps me analyze. So yeah, if it's a bit dry, just keep it in mind that way, that it's to be reinforced with more of a people touch on the left side.
I mean, it'd be pretty amazing if you went from aerospace engineering to like soft touch, cuddly feely, like emotional, like team bonding coaching set. That'd be a pretty amazing career switch.
Okay.
We don't know lawyers who did that.
True. I've seen cases, but it's not my case. I really like the numbers and the analytics side of things.
Cool. Take it away.
Yeah. All right. Let me share my screen. All right. You guys can see it centered?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So what to expect? I mean, we talked about it real brief. I got an answers because I reached out to most of you through LinkedIn. Topics I'll keep in mind in the back of my head, but you guys bring it up if it applies to your case. Is how is it applied to remote working, right? So steering and managing culture remotely. Somebody had a question about if it's more of a freelance team, so there's a bit of competition within it. And the other one was on a daily basis, right? So lots of people know, hey, you steer missions, culture on a monthly or quarterly, right, in team meetings, but how to try and do it on a daily basis, right? Those are the 3 topics that came up. If another as I talk comes up, just speak up. All right, so gonna break it up in 3 things. I'm gonna take you first of all into the foundation, which is basically my checklist when I step into a team to understand what they're doing, and which kind of sets the framework to then keep in mind what gets in the way and then building the systems to try and improve, well, team performance, aka team culture, right? So I look at it really from a performance number, but at the end, it's the culture that improves the team performance. And then what I'll do is, as I go through it, exercise and tips, I'll try and match each step with a typical exercise I do for myself to clarify things. Yeah. All right. All right. So what is the foundation for a high-performing team? For me, it's all basically strategy and understanding the challenge, right? So by strategy, lots of people have different definitions of strategies. You can take it to different levels. I'll take you through what I consider enough for me to start working on a team. And it's basically a strategy, which I'll show you shape now, the organization structure or team structure, because if they're smaller, organization is a big name, but basically I call it team structure. The leadership style, so really understanding what the strengths of the leader are and how they can manage their team. And the brand. I won't go too much into brands because, well, here Anne would take the floor, but I do use, to be honest, like for me, it changed me a lot, Anne, your book, because everything I did, I always did it from a very, let's say, without thinking of brands. And those exercises really helped me compensate, let's say, my exercises to really connect, let's say, close the loop and finish the story. What I'll do to make it practical, it's a case me and Maya are working right now. It's a project we're in. It's Moyu. If you guys don't know it, Moyu is basically erasable stone paper notebook. So it's a tool to hack away at single-use paper. And has one branded for branded change. So it's super practical, right? So I'm going to show you. It'll be an unstructured story because I'm just going to show you snippets of it. But just so you know that it's a real case that we're actually working on right now and improving as we go. All right. So if we start with strategy, I always, surprisingly enough, everybody thinks they have a very clear strategy of like, oh, this is our vision and this is how we're going to get there. But I always first take an eagle eye view of it. And for me, an eagle eye view is just the strategic roadmap. If you guys work in corporates, it's a very typical thing. It's like, okay, what are my milestones the coming years? What I find in most small teams is that their purpose-driven story and everything's all there, but they don't have very clear of like, okay, these are my steps, and really measuring if they're meeting steps. So they start jumping all over the place because they have the steps, but they start defocusing. So I basically say, okay, how long in future you want to plan? Usually we say, let's take 3 to 5 years. And let's start for me to understand what have you done the last year, 2 years, 3 years, so the last big milestones, and explain to me the next steps to the goal you want to go. In the case of Moyu, just to make it practical, Moyu, at the end, they want to fight deforestation, and their way to do that is to try and make local circular paper industry. Their struggle is that stone paper, which is what they use right now, can only be used in Taiwan, and they need to make it into local systems, right? So to have factories in different countries or different continents to make it all in, let's say, within their region area they're operating. The problem with that is that they don't have the demand, right? So not enough people know about stone paper. So since there's not enough demand, there's not enough interest of people to invest in making an actual factory to supply it. So what they went about is like, okay, the last 2-3 years, if I summarize what we've done, we've tested stone paper, we've seen it does solve and can replace paper. We've set up the business. We're trying all types of sales as promotional gifts or office supplies. So they've done their tests and found a bit promotional gifts was the best way in to start. So then they started activating sales around that. And that's where we stepped in last year. And we started saying, okay, so this is working. So now let's try to start replicating in different markets to see if it to validate it, right? See if it really works and it's not just a Holland thing. And once it starts, start building partnerships, because with the team we have, it's pretty small. We're 10 people. It's really hard to obviously expand across all of Europe. So we're systematically now just trying to find strategic partnerships to do the market development in new markets. And then in the future, it's all about, okay, we have it. Let's try and tackle office supplies and school supplies to really start getting more volume, not just notebooks. And once that's in place, then start increasing awareness, collecting the stone paper and recycling it. And if that's working and it's circular, then start replicating in other parts of the world. So it's a very, let's say, you can go in depth into each one, but it's kind of to set the mark in the coming years. Once I have that, then I say, okay, then let's go Hawkeye. Let's zoom in to really see if the different elements of your strategy make sense, right? And also, what are we going to measure? Because lots of people start saying strategy and they say 12 million things, but then they don't really measure it or perform it. So I make sure that whatever we have, it's something we're going to really focus on it and improve systematically. Lots of people use the business model canvas for this. I'm a fan of the business model canvas because I can just do it in bullet points. But I've come to realize that people respond better to visuals. So as long as you address these questions, I've learned to like the exercise of drawing a mind map. That's why I call it the like strategy map. And a mind map, I mean, I'm guessing you guys are familiar with mind maps. It's you start in the middle and you start bridging out and gradually visualizing everything that you're doing as a company. In the case of Moyu, right now we do notebooks, but it's going to be all about feel good, do good stationery, right? So everything we do, you're doing good because you're fighting single-use paper and also creating that good feeling that you're actually contributing to changing the paper industry, which I'll get back to later why that's important, part of the story. But that's really at the center of what we're offering people. Then what we say is, okay, so what are we promising with what we're doing is really sustainability approach. So everything we do is not just fighting deforestation, but planting trees. What we do is made to last. So even though we're selling stationery, right, when we want people to buy, it's not for the sake of like buy. It's really, we hope that what you buy, you're going to use for the next 5-10 years, right? As long as the notebook lasts you. Yeah. And
So do I understand correctly that what you're saying is that you can't build a high performance team if you don't have a clear strategy?
yeah, so for me, yes. And the reason for that is that when you start doing marketing or sales or having talks, unless this is that clear, you get so many conversations, so many meetings. People say one thing, others. So when you start talking about efficiency and really focusing on the right things, if this is not clear, you get too many discussions. So for example, in Moyu, even this part of like, what are our clients, like businesses, web shop, platforms? I don't know how many discussions we've had. Is it a reseller? Is it a distributor? Is it a mix of them? And having all these discussions that don't really add any value. So if you make those decisions and pin them, you can always review them every now and then, see if you change, but you try and avoid all that extra communication.
Now, how do you make sure that a whole team understands a business strategy really clearly? Because I find that a lot of leadership teams that have like, the 90-page strategy, and I always say like, just give it to me in like, 2 sentences, like we want to be the X for Y in 2 years and have X of the market or something like that. And I find that it's often like that kind of level of clarity is really lacking on all levels, right?
Yes. So for me, it's basically, this is the level of clarity I would have. Like, it doesn't go deeper than this. Like, unless you go then you go into really operational things, like on a weekly basis or bi-weekly with the teams of what are we going to try to improve this. But for me, level of clarity would be, you have this, and then you have your performance numbers that indicate whether it's working or not. And that's it, especially in a small team, in a startup, in innovation, because everything else, so much work goes into the plan. And at the end, you don't even look at it. It doesn't even matter that the team looks at it, right? Because you get into this kind of like high-speed work. And at the end, all that matters is, do we see the performance numbers going up? And then you say, okay, what happened? And you look back. So for me, it's more on a quarterly or yearly basis. You come back and check this picture first with the leadership team. And then if changes happen, then you can make it to the team. But it's not like a constant thing that needs to be present. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah, and then another element is usually all these things I summarize not in a super big deck, but kind of in a what I call playbook, where everybody can have it, and if you like looking at it and going, you can review it, and it's just kind of this is what we're doing, but you keep it simple and thin. Yeah.
And do you believe that this has to be co-created? I mean, in terms of the creation process of this, if we're talking in terms of teams, how important is it? How many people have to have co-created this in order to make it a strong team?
So I feel usually as a leader, you have your ideas, right? So you do the mind map for yourself, but then you have workshop sessions with the team to sketch it out, right? And it's just more as a leader, because as a leader, you want to shape it and you have your ideas, but you also want to give the others the room to talk and discuss it. I'll get back to that in leadership style in a bit,
Okay.
because it also just depends. I always give a very consulting answer because, well, mainly it's true. It depends, because it depends if you have a very senior team or a very junior team. Everybody says quite like ideas, they're all good and everything, and they are to listen to, but not every idea is good, right? So at the end, you just have to know who's on your team and kind of understand, yeah, and make decisions depending on the team members. But you do want to give a sense of involvement and that they contribute. Yeah. All right. Well, I can go through it if you guys have questions on it. I mean, I'll go through it just a bit more. Yeah. So at the end, it's basically how you're going to make money, right? How you're going to raise awareness, and then all this it can go into really a lot of detail. And what I always try and start is little by little, so the mind map grows, right? So if somebody comes to me, especially a small team, and says we're doing all this, I'm like, okay, yes, but if somebody tells me, for example, SEO is part of my strategy, but they don't have copywriters or they don't have things, then it's like, great that it's part of your strategy or you want it to be, but then I fade it out. It's like, you don't have the team members to do SEO, right? Or if you say, we're going to do web shop, great, you have a web shop live, but if you don't have people actively trying to improve it and everything, then it's not really a strategy. It's a wish list. But then that's how I systematically kind of market for myself and say, okay, this is working. Okay, it's part of the strategy. And then you systematically enrich it. Yeah. Okay. Then the other part is the team structure, right? So depending on the size of the team, this is more or less important. But it's basically just giving an overview of the different responsibilities or different work you're tackling as a team and how everybody interacts together, right? If you're a big organization, usually it's a big org chart and, there's layers and everything. When it's a small team, I like having it just flat and more Venn diagrams. At the end, it's just finding the fit. Again, it depends on the team, but as long as you tackle different elements, right? So in the case of Moyu, this is how we've done the org. Like most startups, you're doing sales, product innovation, right, and marketing. And we have the different members of the management team really focusing on trying to improve that area of the company. And then where they interact together is where they have discussions. For example, these two look for how to improve communications to get business leads, right? Here it's how do we raise awareness about impact? Here it's more, okay, great, but if there's no margins with all this, it won't work, right? So you, rather than have everybody talking about it, you try and isolate who is really relevant to be in those meetings. So you keep everything a bit agile and going. And also important to make sure they can just make decisions, right? And not have to have a huge discussion all the time around everything. And then in our case, operations we do on the side. And So when I try and step in on a team, I usually always bring this to the side and say, okay, you guys focus on your things, and I'll try and take care and structure all the things nobody likes to do, right? Because nobody likes to do the administration, you know, having the stats so you can make decisions, tech things. So usually when you're a startup, there's always somebody that's really into product and somebody really into sales. Those are the typical things. And the rest, that's where we try and come in and simplify things for them so they can work faster. And I'll circle back to that on how this part, even though it's very analytical and technical, can really help, let's say, the culture, because simplifying things, everybody enjoys work better and you just become more efficient. All right. So then when we go to leadership style, everybody has very different types of leadership. I mean, Maya and me are complete opposites, and we always like clashing of like, oh, we should do this or that. At the end, it's finding the balance. Usually, what the main decisions to make are, you know, how much do you keep as a decision to yourself? Like we said before with the strategy, how much do you say, hey, I trust the team, let them do it themselves, and I'm just there, you know, to spar and give feedback, but it's their decision. And then another one is a bit, you really have democratic, right? Like everybody's voting. Every team is different, right? It's a matter of trying or whatever feels good to you as a leader. I always like, as an example, those people say, hey, can you give me examples? I always like to say autocratic is typically a startup, right? Where you have a founder, they're the experts, they usually have a younger team, and they're just saying, okay, we're doing this, and it's kind of their show. The delegative, I don't know if you guys know holacracy. It's been around for several years, but it's basically you make each team just manages themselves, and they make their own decisions, and you just give them a target and objective, and they go at it. And democratic is a bit more the whole agile scrum, right? Where you have teams come together and really prioritize the work and decide what's next and vote on it. Again, those are typical examples I give for each of these. Then secondary style, this one is, yeah, you have people that are more coaching. Yeah, and go for it.
Okay, I was going to interrupt you.
Go.
So you say here at the top, you say like decide based on your personality, etc., how you plan to lead the team. Is this really a decision? It seems like this is like 90% just the way you were born, and maybe 10% decision on where you might want to grow. And how do you know? Like, I mean, it seems like you need to know a bit of the trade-offs for each in order to know how to choose.
Yeah. So for example, like I really like just letting people decide and you know, guys figure it out, decide it, give sparring. But depending on the team, you might have to step in and say and mark the way, right? Because again, the seniority of the team or the styles, there might be more introverts, or somebody might be very extrovert and take charge where you don't want him to. So sometimes even though you're like, I'm completely an introvert. Like everybody tells me, oh, you're so extrovert. I've learned to adapt, but anybody that really knows me, I'm complete introvert. And as a leader, you kind of, I feel gradually with practice, you learn how to adapt to steer different people differently. So based on the case, I choose different styles of guiding a team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wonder if everyone is as rational as you in this process.
No. So exactly. So
my project, I choose the leadership style.
No, so I always find this like it's just nice to keep in mind. Like for example, this is very into going to soft skills. So again, this is kind of an area where I start talking. There's people that know everything inside out and everything. For me, it's more common sense. I just try and adapt to who's in front of me without thinking of all the theory behind them. I just like showing this to show like always reflect on how you're acting, right? Like there's certain situations that there's a lot of friction within the team, and even though people like to blame, oh, this guy or this person or sometimes you can correct it with the way you're guiding the team. And it's really hard. It's not easy. And sometimes you'll make wrong decisions. But even though your personality is your way, you can adapt if you choose to. Then on the other hand, for example, Maya comes lots of times and says, yeah, but you have the wrong people on the team. Just hire the team you want. And that's the same thing. Like sometimes you're in the luxury to do that, and other times you're not. So it's a choice of the leader what you do. Yeah, Mark.
Hi. Yeah, I have a question about. I think the culture is mainly decided by the top management of an organization. So how does it work when you advise and let's say they have an autocratic style, and you would suggest, well, maybe you could switch to delegative or democratic style. It's not that easy for a company to switch a whole system everyone's working. So how do you do that?
Yeah, so that's a bit in the governance. I'll touch on the governance later, but even though everybody has their own style, there are ways to design the meetings, right? So for example, do you know holacracy? Have you heard about it? So holacracy, for example, which is more let them rule themselves. If you switch to that model, they have a whole bunch of guidelines of how to do the meetings correctly, how to do the weeklies, how to do the quarterlies, and basically it's training the leader or whoever takes the lead. Because in that one, actually, what's funny is the leader in the team varies every meeting. So basically, you're always training everybody on the team to facilitate the meetings. And once you get that going, it takes a while, but it's practice. But they switch to that, and people can point themselves out. Hey, you're not following the guidelines. So it's through that you try and massage that style of leadership into the company or into the team.
Okay, thank you.
So same thing with Scrum, right? Scrum also has its guideline, like Agile. They also have the guidelines for the what's it called, for the weekly reviews or the sprint reviews, and the feedback, the demos. So if those don't fit, that's where you come in and think, okay, how do I want my meetings? And you gradually design your own until you get what you want in there. All right, Salim?
Yeah, my comment is around the we don't always get the liberty of designing our own teams.
Yeah.
And in the circumstances that I'm in, I have a couple of co-founders that we've come together and we are trying to create success and a successful leadership team. I happen to be the CEO and in charge of managing that. But I have had to, or I'm curious to hear about, the couple different versions of it. One, like decide your style, or like decide the best style for the people that you happen to be in the room with. That sort of idiosyncrasy is the nuance is interesting to me, and I'm curious to hear more about that if that plays out later in the day.
Yeah. So yeah, if I like short answer, I guess if you don't, it's what kind of I said with Maya. Like if you don't have the luxury of building your own team and you have to lead them, then yeah, you have to actually put yourself in the back and see the best way to adapt to manage that team. And it takes time because you have to see how people are responding, right? And what's the energy in the team when you have different meetings. And based on what's happening, you're thinking of ideas on how to improve it. So Moyo is a perfect example. They had a certain meeting routine, and you just see in the faces of people that they disconnect, or it takes too long, and you just feel the energy in the meeting. So then it's okay, how can I make it shorter, or how can I make it more interesting, and you try things, and sometimes you try and it doesn't work, and you're okay, that didn't work, and you try again. So it's a bit of trial and error. All right. So if I give Moyo's example, because again, like Anne, you said, like you switch yourself. So depending on the size of the team, you also try and think, okay, if I'm a certain way and I need other leadership styles, you also try and think like, can the other leaders in the other people in the management team have different styles? So in case of Moju, we have a very interesting setup in the sense that, okay, there's founders and they're kind of making the decisions and they're like, let's go this way, let's go that way. Me and Maya are sparring with them, just kind of advisory on giving ideas based on our experience. But you have very different characters. So you have the CEO who's all about the vision. He'll talk about trees and nature and circularity. So he's very strong on that, a bit less on structure. But he plays his role of creating the excitement of what we're doing very well. Then the other founder, he's your typical, high performance athlete, get better, numbers, sales. So he's very good at getting oriented, at getting results. But what you see is a bit, because they're so focused on that, the team really needed a bit more, let's say, pace in the work. Like we were doing lots of things, but it was not the right things all the time, and it took very long. So basically what we did, and we complemented very nicely, is I stepped in to kind of put my finger in different holes, like with tech or with copywriting or little elements. Or finance, I'm kind of helping across the board where I can. And Maya's just setting the pace. Like, let's go. And you get this nice balance, which is okay until now. But the interesting fact is that probably won't work anymore, because we've managed to get the systems and the way of working in place. But now what you see is that to grow, we're probably going to have to shift, right? And the shift is going to have to go more towards transformational and coaching, because now we got the routines in there, but now we have to coach people to do things on themselves or improve them. So that's going to shift now in the way we guide the team. So that change is also kind of important, knowing, depending what the company is, how to shift what you prioritize as a leader, because you can't do everything all the time, or at least it's very difficult to. So it's good to know your limits and focus on the right things on the right time.
And in your experience of that, has that been explicitly, does everybody know when you get to that point? Because it seems to me that's a friction point, right? Because if people within teams like being the do-it-all, but you don't need a do-it-all anymore, maybe you could speak a little bit to that sort of idea that these things are often seen in the rear view mirror, but not perhaps in the present.
So there's always going to be, if somebody's hoping to switch it, so usually if they're very experienced, they can shift, right? But not everybody can coach, or not everybody can be a pace setter. So for example, I couldn't do Maya's role. I'm always like, I don't like pressuring people. I don't like, where is this? What's that? We need this. Because for me, it creates a bit of, let's say, tension and an area. I perform worse in that setting. So if you can't do it, you don't do it. But usually you can find somebody that say, hey, this is what we need to do. But not everybody has to switch, right? So the luxury of having a 4-person team is that you can align, and let's say the best solution, let's say the best of you, and you have to agree, you step into that role. And sometimes, like I say, like even if nobody likes it, somebody has to take it for the team. Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, the management delegates to us like a lot. Your leaders have to be willing to increase the management team to get this going.
Yeah. So another, like what Maya's saying, like we're in there and we fit and we shift. But for example, like if another example is, if you can't do it within your leadership team or you're one person, then you choose. I use a lot of sports metaphors, right? So because everything I do is actually around sports and board gaming. I try to apply it to business, but it's basically you choose your captain, right? Or your whatever is the next person on the team that you think, hey, they can actually play this role. And then you gradually put them into that, as long as somebody's doing it. And you test it and you see if it works.
Mm.
Yeah. All right. And then the last part is the story of what you're doing and simplifying it. So here I'm not going to go into branding because, well, you guys, I'm sure you've read the book. I'm sure, well, Anne is much better qualified to talk about it than me. What I do that I've noticed that helps when I step into a team is try and create the whole brand and try and just reduce it to a bite-sized thing that people can try and memorize, and gradually improve it. It's always a work in progress, because I always think of like, okay, this could be better, or this could be more powerful, but I try and just get the bite-sized narrative that everybody can memorize, and this is literally what we're doing, and see the energy that triggers. When it comes to Moyu, it's a bit small, but I'll do the voiceover. Basically, why Moyu exists is they realized at some point that everybody was talking about the airline and CO2 and carbon footprints, but kind of nobody was talking about the paper industry. It wasn't really a hot topic in social media. And the paper industry is really responsible for 17% of deforestation. And if you look at it, it's even more polluting. It's a bigger industrial polluter than even the airline industry. It's number 3 if you rank it on that level of pollution. And you say, hey, it can be prevented pretty easily, right? Because stone paper really can just replace regular paper. So why is nobody talking about it? Does nobody know that this alternative exists? So what Mo said is like, hey, let's try and just make the jump to circular. And how to do that is just through erasable stone paper notebooks for now, right? This will start. And we kind of frame it, this is just our tool to hack away at single-use paper, right? So basically the way the team is mindset is like every notebook we get in somebody's hands, it's somebody that's not going to use 15 notebooks in the next 3 years, right? So you're preventing a whole bunch of paper being used. And then to add to it, we say, and on top of that, we plant a tree. So not only do we try and save trees from being cut, but we also contribute to reforesting. So we kind of shaped it as, just gave it this name of, this is our way to fight deforestation. Yeah. So very high level, but it's always just, there's a whole bunch of layers below this. All right. So for me, that's always the checklist of, if I understand this for myself, then I can at least get to work. So no, ideally the team would have it, but the reality is I've been into different agencies, startups. It's usually very vague, or it's not completely clear. So that's usually my first work, is trying to, if not to communicate to the team yet, at least to align with the leadership on what are you guys doing? Because if it's not clear for me, then it's really hard for me to step in and mold the team. So what usually gets in the way, even if all that's in place, and that's the next things I try and tackle, is, well, this is what we just kind of talked about, is the clarity of the story, because it's very hard to give direction if that's not clear, right? So this is very typical. I get hired by corporates to teach this for innovation. So what corporates really have trouble, because corporates have everything working, right? They have their brand, they have their vision, their mission. Imagine this 2 billion euro company doing construction, for example. You're not going to go into them and teach them how to shape their organization and their team cultures, and they got that. But what you do see that needs training with employees when they're trying to innovate again, is getting the story clear. So really a new innovation project, just this checklist, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the value of the solution you're giving? The market potential, give me a clear plan. Doesn't have to be a business plan, it doesn't have to be a complete business plan, but literally just milestone plan and timelines. A bit more detailed than what I gave as a roadmap, but just simple enough that you can talk about it easily and decide and make decisions to move forward. And the other one, which I'll show in a minute, how I tackle the resources, is people aren't aware of how much certain things are, right? So if you're going to do marketing, like, oh, I'm going to do social media marketing. What does that mean? Like, what do you need? It's not just, I made that mistake when I was in Ligas. I thought, yeah, I had the perfect strategy pitch, social media, this, that. But then when you execute, you realize, yeah, you need a lot more than what you have. So I have a kind of an Excel to give an overview of that. The other one is development plans. So for culture, what I see a lot, especially in small teams, because you don't have the time to focus on employees, is really taking the time to see which way they want to develop. I always get the question of like, yeah, but it doesn't always match with what the company is going. But if you don't take into account what somebody wants to become in 3, 5, 10 years, and even if though you're afraid that if it does work, they're probably going to leave, they're probably going to leave a lot sooner than they would normally, because you're not, let's say, at the end, you need to try and the team needs to fit what they want. And you it's kind of a balance, right? They have to feel like they're growing in the way they want to. And they have to, with that growth, they have to contribute to the team. And hopefully it's for very long. But the reality is an employee usually grows faster than the company, right? So I have a good example in an agency I worked. It's a very good fit when people are juniors or mid-seniors, because they get to work on really cool projects and develop themselves. But as they mature, it starts to not fit in the culture, because let's say they hit their ceiling and they need more challenges with which the agency cannot provide. So then it's just a natural step that you're going to lose them. But if you don't focus on helping them develop quicker towards what they want, they're going to leave sooner, because they don't feel like they connect with what you're doing, or they don't feel like you care about their growth. So that's really important to have the development plans in place to have those conversations. For example, in Moyu, we don't have that. We're going to start that now because we were busy with the systems, but now we're going to switch to, okay, let's start improving the team and just making sure that we give them what they need. And the other one is well, the culture, right? And that's a bit the click and really seeing how people interact. So one of the challenges in Moyu, for example, I feel everybody's super nice and nobody wants to create conflict. But conflict sometimes is good. Like we always give me and Maya as an example. Like we fight all the time. Okay, not all the time. 5% of 90% of the time. Now, so it's not really fights, but we disagree on a lot of stuff, but we disagree in a way that is healthy and there's friction. And at the end, it doesn't really matter if one's right or the other, as long as we decide a way forward. But okay, it's unfair because we're also husband and wife, but that kind of conflict you do have to train in there and show people that hey, it's okay to have that conflict, and it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. And also, and another thing I feel that here's really important: remote. So when we talk remote, because I've had it in a lot of places, I've had times where there's somebody working in South Africa, for example. I was, let's say, a mobile development team, and the leadership of that company was saying, hey, it doesn't work, he's somewhere else, we want him here. And I'm like, hey, but the guy is happy over there, he's more productive than anybody else on the team, he comes once a month, so the bond with the team is there, right? So it's not like it's just a faceless person somewhere. Why change that? Just trust that he's doing what he's doing. Maybe shift the trust. Don't make it on, is he really making his hours? But just focus on the deliverables. Because I mean, at the end, I don't care if somebody works 2 hours or 8, if I'm getting what I expect from them. And you get there into a tricky thing, because let's say you're paying them 8 hours or 40 hours. If they're working less, is that bad? You always get a sense if they're underworking or not. And at the end, I'd rather steer more on what's coming out than really tracking the hours or having that trust issue. But that's also kind of a personal thing. But it's finding what's right. And for not everybody can work remotely, but I think most people can, and you see it in the way they are, and they're much better outside of the office than in the office. Yeah.
But I think to get there, Ángel, it's really important to understand what targets does someone need to hit, right? And I'm guessing that for 90% of organizations, that's actually really tough. Because I think the only way that you can switch from saying like, hey, we just need you to be here and we need to know that you're working, from like, doesn't matter how much you work as long as you get your stuff done. The only way you can do that is if you actually can track goals.
Yes.
And the only way you can track goals is if you set them.
Yeah. So I'll show you now a way how I do it for myself, because it's a bit in my planning and assumptions I make about how a person performs. And then if performance goes down, then I usually have a talk. Hey, I see this happening, but it's not that I measure, but I have kind of a thumb in the air finger of what I think should happen. And I'll come back to it. Yeah, and I'll address it. Yeah. All right. Actually, right now. So thinking of that it's basically when I step in is clarity in story, balance of what an employee needs versus what I need in the team or the leader needs in the team, and a click of the culture of, like everything's in place to have good discussions and there's trust and you see that people take responsibility for what they're doing. So how do you influence this? Basically, these four things I said, right? Strategy, organization, leadership, brand. I say, okay, you can have the best strategy, and I've seen them, but if you don't have the deliverables, right? So if people can't create good deliverables, it doesn't matter, right? And I've seen it a lot of times. I've worked in lots of innovation projects where I think good ideas get discarded because somebody comes, hey, we did these, 50 experiments. Conclusion is it's not positive. But then you look at the experiments and you're like, oh my God, like, of course they don't work, right? So if the quality of what you're doing is not good, the results don't mean anything. So you really have to check that the quality the team can produce is significant of whether the strategy or the concept you're working on can work or not. The other one is workflows. So your processes, the team dynamics, and the culture. So let me circle through, give you examples of each one. And then the other thing is, I hear a lot, like there's a lot of discussions, like you have reviews and it's like, oh, sales are going up, sales are going down. And the discussion is usually like, let's work harder or what can we do different? But nobody really knows it like really ships. It's just kind of like, let's do more, let's do less, but nobody really has a hand on what is really changing or what are you doing differently and how that's contributing. And it's because most people, it's very hard to track everything. Nobody likes to do that. But you can do it in a ballpark figure. So let me show you a bit. So quality of deliverables. I always look at effectiveness and efficiency. So basically, can I improve the quality of it? So let's say an email goes out. Am I getting better responses? Or social media posts, do they get more engagement? Versus efficiency, which is more how much time it takes me to do it. Right. So basically, if you set yourself, let's say you're a marketing team, and say, hey, every week I can more or less deduct that it takes us to make four posts, 2 emails, whatever it is. So you kind of set a baseline and you see if you can deliver it. And then you systematically go on try and improve the tempo if needed. Or if it goes down, you start saying, hey, what's going on? Why are we not delivering at the same pace? And you kind of gradually on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, just check in on the progress without having to measure every single day what hours are going into the work. This is, believe it or not, like a simplified version of what I do. But it's just to give you guys an idea. It's a bit complex, but it's a matrix I create for myself to estimate if I'm asking too much from a team or not, right? So I'll give you an example of the sales team in Moyu. So one of the problems in Moyu is everything we do, all the luxury problem, but all the sales we do is inbound. So it's people coming to us and us having to communicate and just, work people through the funnel and try and close deals. But what happens is there's not enough money yet to invest in huge marketing and awareness and things. So we're very reliant on what comes in organically. But it would help, and that's a gut feeling we have, if we start doing more outbound. The thing is, if you look at this, what I do is I say, okay, my sales team, what are the key deliverables they have to do, including meetings, right? Or if it's in our case, a client designing the covers or coordinating the designing of the covers in all roles. And I kind of talk with each one individually to get a sense of how much time they need for different activities, right? Each of the roles. And then I start measuring, right? So what you see here is I know events and team meetings I can really track. And I know, okay, these are kind of set and we're happy with what they're assigned. But what happens is, if you look here, the total time, if I add everything up, it's way higher than the time that is available, right? So in Moyo, we work 4-day weeks. So let's say everyone has 32 hours. So if we have 2 B2B outbound salespeople, they should work 64, right? If I add everything up here, yeah, I need 96 hours for them to realistically also tackle outbound. So what we need to improve, or what I start working systematically at, is, okay, to reduce their pressure and kind of increase the energy, happiness, and hence the culture, right? Because everybody's a bit lighter. How can I improve this element of it? Or how can I improve inputting orders and the communication around orders? And if I improve that, then that's going to free up time for them to really push forward and deliver on the other things that are important. And then that's always the balance. Is there ways to improve it, or do I need to hire somebody else if possible? Yeah. But by creating this, I can steer on that and see if I'm asking too much from the team and creating unnecessary tension, and really step into their shoes to understand it. Does this make sense, or is there any questions on this?
Do you get people to fill in that themselves, or is that your estimations?
So I usually have just talks with people individually to explain their work, how their role, what they do. And based on that, I make this an assumption. If a team's open for it, we measure it. So we say, hey, for the next month, just write down every day how much time you're working on different things, right? To create an overview. So I used to do it. Now I don't do it anymore because I have it in my head and I just go. But I used to write in my calendar every 15, 30 minutes, I would mark, if I have coffee, or if I do this, or Maya would look at my calendar like, what the hell are you doing? I'm like,
Your wife is shaking her head.
huh? Yeah. Maya would be like, what are you doing? But for me, like, it didn't take me anything. It was just kind of, I don't know if you guys know about, like, I got the idea from finances. You know how the people say, if you want to save money, the best way to do it is to, every time you buy something, you take out a pen or something and you write down your expense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people at one point are like, okay, I don't want to take out to write, and this is an unnecessary expense, so I won't buy something. So it's kind of, I got that as like a habit trick on saving expenses. So if somebody needs time with time management, I always advise them to do this. Just take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and get in the habit of, wherever you do something or you switch tasks, write down what you're going to do. And lots of people realize they waste a lot of time, right? They start talking to somebody, or another thing comes in and I worked on that. And they start getting a bit of clarity on where to draw their boundaries so they can really focus on the right things. The more senior you are, you don't need that anymore. But when you're a junior, that's a very useful exercise. And I always tell them, I don't do it to measure what you do. It's more for yourself. But it does help me if I know from you how much time you need to create a post, or to write an email, or to research. Then we can take it into account and really find the right balance that gives you time to focus on certain things, but also the creative freedom to, just research and let your mind wander. And again, every person is different, but it allows you to coach each one individually on and try and fit it into what the team needs. Yeah.
I think this is also a system that works really well if you have a very clear deliverable, like a very clear product. I think I'm curious how this works for consultants and people in the creative industry that don't have super outlined deliverables, and we're very often like, we can't estimate.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I know from like working at a brand agency, of course, we have an idea how much time it costs to create 6 concepts on 6 items. Like, after doing that for 20 years, how much time that could cost your team. But the fact is that, like, time, first of all, time fits the, our work expands to fit the time available. So then they often shrink the amount of time you have, right? So then they say, well, it's 2 weeks. We have 2 weeks until the deadline. You have 4 people. So that's four people times 80 hours. And that's how much time we have.
Yeah.
But I think that like when you start looking at it practically, I think for a lot of people, this, especially if you work on your own, this stuff isn't so easy to just set like, oh, I always spend this much on this thing.
Yeah.
And especially if you customize each consultancy proposal, right? Each project is going to be different. So I'm curious how if there's other people who have this issue.
Well, and likewise, also when you're running a business or you have there's always more to do than you have time for, then you know that no matter what, your second to bottom line is going to be higher than your bottom line as far as like what's available, right? No matter what. And so therein lies like the culture that you design into your leadership team or your roles, and like, okay, it's not just about what you can do, but also what you don't do. And it's not just about not doing it, it's about communicating not doing it and finding other solutions and those kinds of things that are like I'm struggling with a lot right now because we're underwater. As far as like, there's too much to do, there's too many inquiries, there's it's all good stuff, but it's the culture that I have right now is not exactly right to be able to exist successfully in the environment that we're in as a quickly growing company.
Yeah, so, well, and just for yours first, like, of course it's not exact. It's more a tool, because again, thumb in the air, it can be exact numbers, but it's more thumb in the air to get a sense, right? So it's a big what I'm saying, to have a first overview, if on average, more or less, it can be like to clearly see that it's too much, right? And just have that discussion of, okay, so what do we prioritize? Because otherwise, what kind of happens if you don't discuss it or visualize it for some people is people expect you to do it, and all this tension starts building without having the conversation, because not everybody can talk about it, or not everybody's different or introvert, or they don't like the confrontation part of it, right? So for your thing, it's that is a bit difficult, and I struggle with that in Moyo right now. So for example, we're growing, we're scaling, right? We don't have the team to do everything we want to do, and let's say I always tell the founders, you guys are lucky that me and Maya stepped in team, because we work 7 days a week if needed, right? Like, it's Maya has this thing in her head that she doesn't care how much time goes into it, but she wants it done right. And we, like, again, pace setter, we don't count our hours, right? So we don't say, hey, we're going to invoice you, 60 hours we work. We have our agreement and we invoice X amount. But there's other people in the team that don't have that mentality yet, right? They have a mentality of like, this is my work. I'm doing sales, for example. Something in writing a post or something in the website content, it's not my thing. I'm doing you a favor to update it. In one way, they're right? Because again, you have to kind of listen and see what they want to focus on. But what we're trying to get into the team is that, hey, just sometimes you do need to give that extra push. And it is a very, let's say, personal talk. Let's say it's more on the going to the development plans and discuss it on there. And sometimes you get through to people, other times no. And that's where most people say hire fast, but fire faster. I don't know who said that quote, but, or hire fast, hire slow. Okay. Sorry, I messed up the quote. But what I mean is like hire slow. Okay. But what I mean is kind of, you have to just be okay trying to find the right people. I still remember when I was starting, I remember this guy, he was a director at a big bank. And we were talking about organizational structure and everything. And he's like, yeah, when you have this team, what do you think is most important? And, me being sports, soccer, I'm like, yeah, you're the coach. You have to get everybody involved and try and make everybody fit. And he just bluntly told me, no, like, you have what your idea as a coach or what you want. If somebody doesn't fit in, you give them opportunity, right? If they don't fit in, you show them the door and you replace with somebody new. And that's just how it is, because you're trying to shape the team you want, and not everybody fits that picture. And that's usually the hardest decision in leadership is knowing when you need somebody new to replace somebody that doesn't work or won't, or is going to slow your team down. Yeah. All right. Then the other part is reliability. So it's basically focusing on pace and endurance, right? So if I'm hitting a certain quality, how do I prevent from going down? And if I'm, delivering certain elements, how do I not take more time to do it? And nowadays, it's usually basically tech, right? So what I like to do when to map it all out is usually you have a customer side of the story, right? Your customer journey, how they know about you, how they consider whether to buy you or not, how they buy, how you deliver what you do, and then how you try and get them to promote you. Now, for every company, it depends obviously on what you do. This is for a very product-driven example. But you can do the same thing. I can do the same exercise for an agency or for manufacturing. There's just these stages you can adapt. The theory is the same though. You see what the touch points are and what actions you do on each one. And then you try and see how to automate it. So usually when you start, you do everything by hand. But then based on the thing I said on the top, you start seeing, okay, what can I do to reduce time? And then you start finding the tools to do it. Now, this is an example of a tech stack for marketing, but you can also do it with templates, right? Just have a certain proposal template there, or have X amount of profile, let's say, social media templates ready to go. It just varies. What you try and do to automate these elements depends on the context of the team. So this is customer facing, and then same thing with the team, right? So with the team, you think about more how you work, the teamwork. So how are you going to communicate? Different tools you use to work and collaborate together. In case of a business, the administration, right? How do you make it as easy as possible? Reviewing, having this one usually takes the longest. How do you make it that you can really see the numbers you need without that much effort to go fast? And then at some point, what do you need to train the team? Now, in the case of Moyu, like this, we still haven't really tackled. We have these elements here, but the next step is going to be to develop what type of development program can we have to get relatively junior people that step into the team, catch them up as fast as possible to deliver at the quality that we need them to deliver, to not have to hire 4 people, right? And hire 1 or 2. Yeah, and then after that is try and see how to improve it. So at least we have this now here, and then that's the whole fine-tuning the systems. And then we go to more the governance side of things, right? So the team dynamics, and this is all just trial and error, right? So it's trying to get the right rhythm of communication with the right people, bringing in certain opinions at the right time, and people trusting and not saying, hey, what are they doing? Or, sales is not doing their job, or marketing is too slow, or kind of all these necessary thoughts, trying to see how to create an open space or meeting structure that everybody's comfortable with moving forward. So I don't know if you guys seen, but it's basically mapping out all the different meetings you have, that they all have a clear goal, the frequency, adjusting if it's bi-weekly or weekly or monthly or quarterly, who's in it, and what you need to prepare. A good example in Moyu, until now, we do a lot on a weekly basis. We always see our targets, our sales, how we're doing. But you do see then in the monthly, we go over it again, in the quarterly again. So right now, we're still working on how to smoothen it out, that on the weekly, for example, we talk about more action stuff. On a monthly, it's more a meeting, not so much a big meeting, but more shorter check-in. Do we need to change anything? Is there something really going wrong? So it's more of a feedback session. And then the quarterly, use that to really analyze numbers. Now there's different people that say, yeah, but I want to see the numbers every day, things like that. So you try things. I'm like, hey, does it work if on a weekly we just have a slide with an update on just the numbers of sales and leads and things like that, but we don't talk about it, right? We just talk about what do people need to do their work that week. And we're going to try that now and see if they're okay with it. And the people that think it's too many numbers, that you see zone out in the meetings, if they catch on and they become a bit more energetic and contribute in the meeting. So, and again, it's all going to depend on the team. Because I imagine if it's purely a sales team, then they like looking at the numbers, right? Because it's all about scoring and getting that sale in. Whereas if you look marketing, it's probably more creative, right? So it's more about ideas and what can we do next and things like that. Yeah, and you gradually create that structure that everybody's happy meeting in certain points to move the company forward. And the last one is this. I like to do, like, we have the values like in branding, right? But it's more of a team code, I like to call it. And it's, you know, kind of like the pirate code, or, you know, the guidelines of like just certain things that they do change. Because I think at one point in the team, something picks up. So you kind of see what the problems are, and you try and set these guidelines to actively communicate to the team what is not happening, but what you expect them to do. And if somebody doesn't do it, hey, we said we're going to do this. Why aren't you doing it? And you can do it in a group setting or individually. That depends on the situation. In the case of MOU, so this is an exercise, for example, we do every now and then. Hey, is there something going wrong that we think the behavior of the team should change, right? So in our case, it's just always there that we want to focus on to not forget, right? Because it's really hard. We are about saving deforestation and planting trees, but the reality is, to do that, you need to sell notebooks, right? So we want to avoid that. It's all about sales, 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 sales. And we say, okay, we take time to reflect on what does our sales mean to the trees we're planting and how are we doing on that? But also, in this particular case now, we notice some people don't speak up, or, right, there's a lot of talking about numbers and things like that in discussions, but no follow through. Things, maybe because we're doing too many things, but things get left like at 80%, but nobody ever really ends up executing. So we kind of say, okay, let's try and get these guiding principles in there and refresh it. And really, when we talk to people as leaders, try to bring it up, you know, and we see if somebody's talking too much about a certain thing, say, hey, do it, right? Act, and we'll see later the results. But try and cut conversations a bit short to get more momentum into the team. And again, these vary depending on the team. I had another company which was more enjoy the journey, right? So it was a lot of pressure projects, and lots of times we had to address each other in the team. Remember, like, enjoy it. Like, if it's too stressful, let's see how to make it funner, because otherwise you get caught up in that negative cycle, and it just affects everybody. So it's and there you try and get the team to take responsibility, right? So it's not just the leadership, but if you have 2-3 things that you're like, this is what we're trying to improve, you try and get people to remind each other that, hey, if something's wrong, speak it up. Or if you told me, bring it up in this meeting, because this is where you should speak up, so everybody knows. And you try and everybody tries to reinforce the behavior on everybody else, which is slightly different than values.
Well, I think that depends on how you interpret them, right?
What's that?
So I think so. It depends on how you build the values. So the way I like to work is I like to make sure that the values are actually the core drivers of the team culture,
Yeah.
and that they drive the decision making. And so you don't have like 60 different sets of different, you know, codes and languages and rules. And oh, these are the brand values, and these are the team values, and these are the company values. And like, I get very quickly very overloaded, and I find people can't remember them anyway. So I definitely like to build those in, and also make sure that all of those values actually work for every team, So whether it's the sales team or the HR team or the production team or the marketing team, that they have to explain, not me to them, but they have to explain to me, like, these are the rules that we've kind of set together, and how will you bring them to life in your team? And I think that is also where it helps a lot to get people's own input instead of you doing constantly the work from the top. And I find it's also helpful to break down like the big purpose that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Like breaking that down in little sub-team purposes. So if this is the big purpose of company, like what is the purpose of the marketing team in achieving that purpose? And so like breaking everything down for the different teams, I think is quite helpful.
Yeah, exactly. So if I pressure, like I completely agree in the values should be set, and that's called the whole brand of change, right? You have the company values, and that's the difference I like to make with what I call the team code, is those can be, because I'm guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's branding, values are pretty set, right? That's the brand you're building. Those are the values of the company. This is my way of like these can be flexible in my opinion. Like, so it's you have your overall hanging values, which can also be behavioral things, but depending on the team, right, whether it's marketing or sales. So in the case of a startup, it's usually the same for everybody, but like you're saying, depending on the team, they might benefit from different, not values, but these guidelines, right? Because that leader wants to manage their team in a certain way, because they're also, every team is different. So these are the ones that you have, the umbrella ones, and these ones can change if needed. You might not need them. The brand ones might be enough, but it's kind of the tool to try and get the leader to improve behavior in the team. And because the team evolves, they might change over time. Usually they stay the same, but it's the tool I use to try and say, okay, how can we improve? And if they shift, they shift. And you don't memorize. It's not something that you continuously communicate. It's just you check in every now and then. Do we need to shift them to improve certain behavior? If that makes sense. Yeah. But
I think there were a couple of questions that I wrote earlier. So how to build remote teams, how to work with a freelance team, how to steer culture on a daily basis. Do you still have time to address those, Ángel? Because I know we're at
yeah. So this is done. So I'm done. Yeah. So
unfortunately, I have to step out, but I'm gonna just lead. I'm gonna leave you to answer those with the group.
Will do.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. So last slide. Basically the approach, right? So you guys know the approach I usually, when I step into a team, it's 2 weeks with the management team to get a sense of, okay, what's the strategy? What's the game plan? 2 weeks to get a understanding of how they work right now. And already at that point, see if we can spot some improvements of what to switch, the switches we want to make. And then you have 3 months of running it, right? So it's 3 months, because usually a lot of the fixes have to do with the meetings and communications. So you want to design a certain approach, test it, and see what's working, what's not. And then based on those learnings, then you start, okay, this seems to be the path. Was these things going wrong? So now let's systematically try and improve the way of working, the communication, the energy, different elements that you can influence by getting people to behave differently. Yeah. And then this can go on forever, right? So this depends. You just stick on the team and gradually improve. And about, all right. So then about, I'm curious, like the ones that wanted to know about freelance and let's say remote work. Do these elements help you like with those challenges, or is there any specific thing that you're like, okay, this is all nice and nice exercises, but I don't see how to apply it in those settings?
I can say about me that basically I advise in a small company.
Yeah.
It is based only on freelancers as a part of the holocracy concept. Okay, it's more like it's talent-based kind of like company. So you have people who don't necessarily spend every day with each other. People who have different, they are very good, each one very good in what they do, but to work together, it's kind of like maybe you said competition, or maybe you said ego, or maybe it's kind of like I'm not interested about what the logistic side do if I'm the creative, it's like and because they are freelancers and they work in other places also, it's kind of hard to, it's just a slower movement. That's the problem. So now you show the matrix of like 2 weeks and then tactics, and that it won't work. So my question was first how to unite people from so many different, to create cultures when you know that the next day you work in another company. So how can you keep that culture for a while? And the second question is how long it takes until the team really gets it, in terms of like talking the culture, like it becomes a culture.
Yeah, so it's difficult, and with freelancers, it's always difficult in the sense that, yeah, they have their minds, they're not completely focused on your company, right? They have their minds in other things. You have to find the ones that are worth trying to bring into the culture, and the ones that you don't want to isolate, but they add their value, they step in, add their value, and they do other things, right? So for example, in Moyu, something that's super helpful, we work with sales agents, right? So sales agents, they have their countries, they have one's in France, one's in Germany. They don't step in all the time into the team meetings, or if we're going to do, for example, experiments, they're like, hey, I work my way. I'm trying to develop relationships with resellers, for example. Um, they just step in to communicate on what they're doing, and that's enough for them. So it's a choice. So you don't have to force the fit. But if you see it's a problem, then with the ones that do, you try and shape. And if not, like I said before, you have to try and whatever's important, you have to try and find the right people for that role. But the ones that it's not that they don't matter, but they add their value and go, then you let them do their thing because that's what you're bringing them for their expertise. But ideally, you have like a core team of 2-3. Depends on the project, right? But 2-3 people that those are the ones that create the culture, and then the other ones contribute.
Okay.
I can give you an example. I had in a big telco projects, we were a freelance team I was a consultant. So we had a core team with the client and two of my team of our consultants. And then there was 10 other freelancers around us. They had other projects, but actually we made a super nice team for some reason. Like everybody was an expert in sales, expert in marketing, expert in back-end IT for mobile processing payments. And everybody just wanted to do a really good job in their thing. But what we did is we didn't have very heavy team meetings or anything. It was more touch points and what to improve. And then everybody just went off to do their own thing. But it was a very senior team. And then the problem is if they're juniors, it's a bit harder because there you do need to guide them. But usually my experience with seniors, if you
go for the seniors, that's the tip.
well, and also if you meet, so if you meet, you just have to talk about the right things, and that's what I said. We have to experiment, because if you get them in a meeting that they listen to 50% and it doesn't matter for them, then they zone out, right? And they're not really energetic, and that brings the rest of the team down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then it might help to just subdivide meetings, so not a whole group meeting, but just have 2-3 people depending on the topic, and just have lots of loose meetings to bring together.
Thank you.
Kate, I thought you had also a question I remember about day to day, right? So I'm talking about governance, monthlies, weeklies. I guess the best way is communications, right? So it's a bit trying to find that personal touch and then having the best way to communicate on a daily basis. So some people like to, other people don't. Some people like to be on Slack and be answered immediately. Maybe finding a personal thing to address. Oh, like with me, it's very easy. Usually I click with the soccer guys or the sports guys and like, oh, did you see this, that? And you kind of create something that's around work, right? You keep communication and work very simple. And then you kind of find the topics that you know they like and create conversation around that on a daily basis, especially remotely. That kind of helps. At the end is I always feel it's the positive vibe. If you're energetic in a call and you're there, and if you're down, saying why you're down or why you're stressed, that usually helps on a daily basis clear the communications and hence the connection with the team or the other person. Or what's your particular struggle with day to day?
Well, yeah, mainly is about just not focusing just on the day-to-day things that we have to do and take the time that it's needed to focus on the culture and remind everyone of our values and the purpose and the bigger things, that the reasons that we're here together. So yeah, it's something that I think we have to, or at least I have to be conscious about, because otherwise that might be forgotten and just focus on the tasks.
Well, if I can also say something about the Mojo team, as an example in this case, we have a long-standing tradition of doing sports together on a Wednesday evening. And half of the team loves it, half of the team hates it. But funny enough, we skip it, then the part that hates it goes like, oh, there's nothing this Wednesday. Like, weren't you the one that hated it? And then we also established Monday board gaming, and then the sporty team hates board gaming, the non-sporty team loves board gaming. So now it's like an internal struggle to get everybody to either board game or sport. But even when we fight, that is like also sort of a bonding element, I feel, because we also fight in a family, right? And that does create some sort of, like, you care enough to fight feeling. Like, you care enough to fight for either the sports or the board game.
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
And it also helps having that, but also just if you feel something's off, just having a talk with somebody, right? If you're face to face, it's easy. You have a coffee, but if not, you just schedule a quick call and talk. And usually it helps if something's bothering you that you vented, and then usually the other person also opens, and you just find those moments to talk to each other. And if you're the leader, then it's again that goes back to development plans, making sure you have those check-ins in a certain period where you really stay on top of how somebody's feeling and what you can do to improve it.
Yeah.
Anna is asking a question in the chat. Do you have the sports and the board games after work, or do you have them during work hours?
4:30 we start.
So we used to have it after work, and then some people are like, yeah, but then it's outside work. I have other things to do in my life, and then so we try and make it. We stop like compromise, so we stop a bit earlier, and then like people that have to leave a bit earlier to do other things, they leave a bit earlier, and others stick longer. And actually, another thing we're going to try is to try and make it during lunch, right? So I know people like, hey, they don't do it out, but during lunch they do something, and then you make lunch not just be lunch, but make it more of a fun activity type thing. Take a bit more time in lunch and do it when everybody can.
Do you have a lot of experience of working with people who, for perhaps their first or second job, started through COVID and has a remote element to it? Because I wonder whether we're going to see an intergenerational issue about office and team culture. If you've never experienced it in terms of what is good and what is bad, and how we're using these very these very non-remote ideas around how businesses work for some people who have never worked in an office.
Yeah, so for me, I always have that discussion with people because there's a lot of people that say, hey, we need the team here because, you know, here's where like that's where you create the culture, the bond. You need to be present. To be honest, even before COVID, I already worked with hybrid teams that people work remotely and then in the office. And I've learned that it doesn't really, not that it doesn't matter, but you just have to have people find their sweet spot. But the experience that they started working during COVID and then changed later, I haven't really concretely had. But yes, that they were already working remote. So in essence, the same thing.
Challenge that they don't want to be at the office? Maybe?
Maggie?
What's the challenge?
Sorry, say again.
That what's the challenge? Like concretely?
I think
wanna
this
come back.
idea of some of the things that we talk about in terms the building of the 5 pillars of culture without any kind of in-person. I mean, I know young people that are working completely remotely and this is their first job. I think that is extremely challenging to do. And I think that our generation have reference points to understand how to modify that. But if you've never done it, I think it's extremely difficult.
No, clear. So yeah. So somebody has never worked in an office and they also don't want to, right? So no particular experience of that, of somebody just working COVID and having to readjust them. But yes, people that are completely used to working remotely because they're developers, right? And at some point, developers are the easiest one in the sense that I don't know, they're in South Africa or Belarus or they're somewhere else and they're not in the team. What I found to get them engaged is that great that you go remote, but find especially that they're in another country. If they're in another country, find time to at least come for a certain period to bond face to face with the team. So I'm guessing with if it's more somebody in the same country that just doesn't want to come to the office because they're used to working from home, and you're not going to change them, I'd say great. It's as long as you're delivering, but do find moments that they come either once a month or once a week, and that you make that a habit to engage with the team face to face. So for example, me and Maya, we like the balance of working 2 days in the office, the rest somewhere else at home or somewhere else, just to shift the setting. But we do try and force to at least, even though we prefer working remote because we feel more productive, we do like forcing ourselves to be in the office at least 2 days a week to have the face to face. And now, again, like I said before, that's trial and error and finding the sweet spot of what you need or what those people need, that you see that at least there's some interaction within the team.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Luki jumping up.
Bye, Lunji.
Bye, Luki. All right.
No? Good? All right. Well, if you guys have concrete challenges, because this is very, let's say, just walking you through a case. If you guys have more concrete challenges and you want to spar, I'm glad to jump on a call. So just send, like, either we jump on a call and we talk, or just send me the challenge so that I can think about it and we can discuss. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye.
All right.
We're alone.